Welcome, my pretties. Come in, have a seat as we sip the tea of reality. I'm Autumn,
And I'm Haley.
and this is Don't You Know?
The Orphan. Pulp Princess or Whack Job. Bitch of many names. Sklerova.
Damn. Alrighty, out the gate, name calling. Do we have a disclaimer on this episode, Haley?
Yeah, trigger warning. This contains child abuse, cannibalism, mentions of sexual abuse, and cultism. Listener beware. Buckle up, Buttercup, because this case has so many twists and turns you'll fall out of your chair if you're not prepared. Lies, spies, and an occult princess in disguise. Today is the harrowing case of Ondrej and Jakub Mauerova. Welcomed with open arms. Oslo, Norway, January 2008. Adam and his family had recently moved to Norway from the Czech Republic in 2007. Adam was a 13-year-old boy enrolled in school while his mother and siblings would return to the Czech Republic. He was a thin child, illness giving him a weathered paw. Teachers would know that he was bright and clever, picking up Norwegian like a pro, that he also seemed timid and paranoid. Loud noises would easily startle him. He constantly had dark circles beneath his eyes, and he just seemed world weary, you know? Adam would go on to tell stories of ritual child abuse and murder. This obviously leads the school to bring in a psychologist to coax out just what exactly is going on. Adam reveals the extent of the torture with a drawing. It's a rather well-done sketch of several children, 6 of whom have been brutally murdered. The 7th was Adam before he escaped. He blamed all of this on his father. Of course, authorities were involved, and Martin Farner was arrested for the alleged crimes. Adam was removed and placed in the Oslo Children's Home. He wouldn't be there long before being abducted in the middle of the night, sometime in December 2008. He wouldn't be seen again for 3 days. 300 miles from Oslo, Adam was spotted with a man holding hands as they walked into the Neptune Motel to use a phone. The receptionist was getting shady vibes from them. They had a cell phone, so why did they need to use the lobby line? Well, dear, maybe they ran out of minutes. She also didn't like their accents. She thought that they might be Russians trying to run a con. The 2 mysterious gentlemen left without incident after making their call. The receptionist decided to make one of her own. She alerted the authorities to the suspicious behavior. This gave them just enough lead to track the pair to a car rental agency. Riha, the abductor, was caught while filing the return paperwork. McCall Riha was arrested after spending 20 days running from the police. Adam was rescued, and it was a job well done for the police.
Nice.
Right? They saved the 13-year-old boy who was abducted, in the middle of the night after being ritually abused.
I wish it was a little faster than that, but at least they got him.
It didn't take several years,
Yeah,
less
that's
than
what
a
I'm
month.
saying.
They were even rewarded with a surprise. Adam wasn't a 13-year-old boy. He, in fact, was not a boy at all, folks. She was Sklerova, and she was a wanted fugitive.
Womp womp. Wow. Fucking twisty wisty on my ass. What the fuck?
Adam and Barbara had taken their role as a 13-year-old boy so seriously, they even had breast reduction surgery and liposuction.
Whoa.
And I'll tell you, the pictures, I'm flabbergasted that no one who wasn't blind was convinced that they were looking at a child. I mean,
Damn.
we'll look at them on our
man.
Instagram.
Fuck 'em up. Fuck.
You look at them and you're like,
What?
you bought Master of Disguise? Or I want to take you back to 2004, where this all began. Clara Grova was a kind-hearted woman, managing a daycare, going to school, and raising 2 boys mostly on her own. She did have some help from her elder sister Katerina and her ex-husband. She, Katerina, Jakub, and Ondrej all lived happily together in their little house. The boys' father was also involved in their lives, seeing them whenever he could, taking them to their sports practice and different events. The boys were active, having swimming lessons and other activities to keep them occupied. They were good, happy boys. Jakub was 9 and Ondrej was 7. As I said, Clara had a kind heart and wouldn't dream of turning away from a child. She loved working at the daycare where she was introduced to a young girl who had been recently orphaned. Katerina brought Annika, the young girl, to Clara, and she was welcomed with open arms. The only problem? Because Annika was a child left behind sometime in the year 2000 by drug addict parents, Clara's mother, who had initially taken care of the girl, didn't have any papers for the child, and now that she had passed away, the girl had nowhere to go. Katerina had a plan. As they were in luck, she had a friend that could help them out. In order for the adoption to go through, Annika would need to submit to a blood test. But because she was so ill, Katerina couldn't imagine making her go out there. So she had a friend with a daughter around the same age that she had stand in place for the court appointment. Somehow, by sheer luck, Katerina and Clara got this adoption through, not only did they forge documents, they forged a DNA test. Everyone was elated to bring home Annika. Ondrej and Jakub quickly warmed up to the idea of having an older sister. They were excited to play games with her. It all started out well, with the family getting to know one another, going shopping, going to lunches, playing games. Soon, however, life would take a stressful turn. Due to Annika's tumultuous childhood, she had PTSD, different illnesses, and a learning disability. Speaking of Annika being ill, this child was very high maintenance. She had many doctor's appointments, demanded so much attention at home, and because she was mentally disabled, she was hardly independent. Clara began to pull away from social engagements, isolating herself. Her whole world revolved around Annika. Clara couldn't get much more than 3 hours of sleep a night. Between working, school, and being a mother, there just wasn't enough hours in the day. This is why her ex-husband was a little surprised that she went through with this adoption. Now, Katerina would help with the children as well, but she spent just as much energy on Annika as Clara. They both worked at the daycare, a modest salary, nothing spectacular, and because the boys weren't getting the attention they needed from their mother, they began acting out. They too loved Annika, but felt neglected so that she could have what she wanted. Even though Annika was given all of the attention, taken on the shopping trips, and spoiled rotten, she would regularly throw tantrums over little nuisances, often blaming the boys for her outbursts. Clara is overwhelmed and tired. Katerina has the answer, as she always does. She says there is this group that she is a part of, and they have really good values and advice. She encouraged her to reach out to them. So she does, and all is fine on the surface. They have a doctor that she can talk to over the phone for advice. Clara leaps at the opportunity for guidance and text. This mysterious doctor would instruct Clara and Katerina to rub Annika's clitoris to help soothe her when she...
Well, back the fuck up.
Yes,
Excuse me?
prescribed treatment, yes, to masturbate their young daughter so that she would calm down. And they did this.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure everybody was listening to that. Ew.
Yes, very ew. They would do this for hours.
Oh. Whoosh.
The doctor also instructed Clara to...
What fucking doctor?
Oh, we'll get to it. We'll reveal who this doctor is later. But this is a doctor that was prominent in Katerina's group that she encouraged her sister to reach out to for guidance because the boys were acting out and Annika was a handful. The doctor also instructed Clara to discipline the boys harshly, but to never punish Annika. All of this was done through text message. Clara never actually met or even talked to this doctor. Meanwhile, the doctor and Katerina are coaxing Clara to join their group, saying that there's already a few people from the daycare that attend. The group believes in tough love, so this is what they suggest. Clara and Katerina would rent a college and procure 2 dog cages. She was meant to give the boys a hard reset. She took the advice from this doctor who had previously advised her to give Annika 8-hour massages to help soothe her seizures and even massage her sexually to create a bond between them, and yes, Katerina knew of this and may have even had her hand in it as well. Trigger warning. This is where we get deep into the heinous. Before this, the boys had never known their mother to be abusive. This was all sudden and grossly intense to start with. In 2006, Clara and Katerina and the children would go on holiday to a cottage in Varaska, Vitskya, out countryside. There they would be met by friends and fellow colleagues. This holiday was a guise for behavioral intervention for the boys. Jakub and Ondrej would immediately be thrown into the dog cages and forbidden from talking to each other. If they did, they would be savagely beaten. They were fed scraps from dog bowls. Sacks would be placed on their heads while loud industrial music was blasted at them. They would be forced to memorize vulgar words and phrases to be repeated while the adults laughed and jeered. They were completely dehumanized. They would be forced to hurt each other and even to dig their own graves, where they would lie and pretend that they were dead, being told so repeatedly by the group. They would have forks dragged down their arms and cigarettes specifically bought for the purpose of burning them in the groin area. Clara did not smoke. These cigarettes were bought for the sole reason to burn into her son's groin. Burn a bunch of psychos. Ondrej, the youngest, was unfortunately the main focus of much of the abuse. One night he was taken from his cage. The adults would hold him down while his mother cut a circular piece of flesh from his buttock. Ondrej screamed and squirmed as she cut him. Once she had removed the flesh from his butt cheek, she took a bite and passed it around to the other adults to do so as well. Now I hope you are as disgusted as I am. Fucking confused. How in the fuck could a mother justify this punishment for unruly behavior? Surely a quick spank at the worst would have sufficed for a saucy mouth, or hell, maybe read them a bedtime story while Annika, your princess, is in the bathtub. Not throw them in cages and torture them for days before cannibalizing your youngest. Yeah, I mean, like, I don't have much defense for her. Brainwashing is real. She was sleep deprived, codependent, I guess. I don't know. It's pretty fucked up. Anyway, after the ritual abuse was complete at the cottage, Katerina and her clan moved to Kurim. Jakub would return to school, but Ondrej would not, under the claim that he had hearing issues, and Clara was going to find spare time to homeschool him. In reality, the poor boy was shoved into the basement of the daycare where he would be monitored by complicit adults and under surveillance. He would be made to potty in a bucket, which was not emptied often enough, fed scraps, and tortured. He would eventually be moved to a cabinet under the stairs at his mother's house. On the morning of May 7th, 2007, his saving grace, the deus ex machina, was the neighbor anticipating the arrival of his newborn. Edward Turdy was setting up his video-capable baby monitor when he noticed the image on the receiver was not his nursery, but a dirty, naked boy. The child was bound with tape and simply playing about. It was a dark, grainy footage, and Turdy thought nothing of it for a while. He figured he'd finagle the signal later. When Turdy came back, he was met with the same boy. He wasn't sure what it was, but he didn't like the feel of it. Turdy would call the police to report the odd video. It didn't take long for them to arrive and deduce that the signal had to be coming from a nearby neighbor. They went on to canvass the neighborhood, landing on Clara's house. She would answer the door and politely answer their questions, but would not let them in for a quick search. However, one of the other officers who had remained at the Turdy residence could hear the conversation through the baby monitor. The original guy goes back, and now Clara can't politely decline. She's under suspicion of some heinous shit. Police bust in and find the mysterious locked door under the stairs closet. Of course, Clara and Katerina are denying that there is any child hostage in there. Likely story. The police gain entry to find Ondrej naked, bound, and filthy from his own shit.
Clean your shit.
They just ignored him, just left him in there. Clara and Katerina are immediately arrested. Annika comes out, making a scene about her mother being taken away. The children are rescued. Despite seeming to be kept in awful conditions, Ondrej was nonchalant about his rescue, chatting and laughing with the EMTs in the ambulance. Obviously, the telltale signs of the abuse were discovered when they examined the children. When asked about it, the boys would say the scars on their arms were scratches from their pet gerbil, and the welts on the groin were from wasp stings.
Poor babes.
These revelations almost seemed rehearsed and were obviously not vibing with the severity of the scars.
That seems to be a very typical
The evil you know. Don't tell anybody about it because they'll take you and worse things will happen. It's like, well, what's worse than being fucking thrown in a dog cage and degraded for 3 days? Jakub, Ondrej, and Annika would be taken to a children's hospital where the abuse was documented, at least for the boys. Annika went through a fit when they tried to examine her, so they let her be. Jakub and Ondrej, though brothers, were quite hostile towards each other, but they both revealed to admire Annika deeply, not liking it when she was displeased or hurt. In fact, often was the case that they would stand in for her punishment, resulting in each boy getting hit with the cane instead of her being hit twice. The sun rose and set on Annika for this whole family, and they didn't even know who she really was. During the day, the boys would seem fine, but at night they would often fall into fits and need comfort. On May 12, 2007, hospital staff would discover Annika missing. They didn't know how. It was really just a parlor trick. Of course, they were hysteric, as now they had a mentally disabled, abused child on the loose. They looked everywhere for her, but to no avail. This would set Jakub and Ondrej's progress back, for their precious Anna was now gone, and they both couldn't protect her. Eventually, the boys would open up about everything they had gone through. Police thoroughly investigated the shit out of everybody. Hanna Basova, a colleague and friend of Katerina and Clara, was sought for questioning. Jan Turek and Jan Skurla were also under watchful eye. These three were alleged by the boys to have been present during the ritual child abuse at the cottage. After Barbara had been MIA for a few weeks, she sent a handwritten letter. She wished to explain why she fled the hospital. She saw news of her mother's arrest and sought means to help her. Now, the institution had done everything it could to keep the children away from the papers and news stations. Somehow, Annika was left alone long enough to play with the channels until the news came on. So convenient. She also wanted to shed some light on Clara's treatment of the stepbrothers, citing their unruly behaviors and Clara's overwhelming life. She was just seeking out the best way to straighten out her sons. This letter was met with suspicion. It was meant to be written by a mentally challenged 13-year-old, but the spelling and grammar were immaculate. It did have a childlike lilt to it, but it was unmistakably mature and clever. It would later be tracked to a scout cottage that Katerina and her friend Barbara had worked at for a time, but there was no sign of Annika. The adoption also led to many suspicions. The detectives decided to bring in Jakub Pataka, the reporter who had initially helped Clara with the adoption. He claimed to have been an unwitting pawn in the whole ordeal. He simply wanted to help a friend adopt an abandoned child. Of course, the police were skeptical. They ransacked his apartment but found no trace of Annika. They used the DNA sample from her adoption to test against any found in his apartment, but there were no hits. And in fact, this DNA didn't match up what was taken from Clara's home. Yep, now they've discovered the adoption of Annika was even more muddied with mystery. The DNA from the adoption proceedings matched the daughter of Katerina's friend. So whose DNA was found in Clara's house? They had called her Annika, but her identity was slowly unraveling. Clara and Katerina were forced to reveal who was really in their care all this time. It was Barbara Sklarova, former employee of Clara's daycare. And here we are again, a fabricated life tangled and twisted with secrets and lies. The girl they are worried about being held captive is actually a 33-year-old woman and a good friend of Katerina. They discovered this connection when looking through Barbara's past. They went to school together in 95 and were members of the splinter sect of Barbara's father's Grail movement. Here they hit the bingo. The DNA from the adoption record was of a member's daughter, Victor Scala. All the while, Jakub and Ondrej are being treated for their abuse and making leaps and bounds until they find out that Anna is really Barbara. This set their progress back by weeks. Of course, they had spent the last year and a half thinking that this precious sister who needed them to protect her. To find out she was an imposter. When does the suffering end? Their father is working to get custody while this is happening, but was denied until his involvement or lack thereof could be further verified, and in the meantime, getting a job would have been helpful to his case. Jakub and Ondrej would remain in limbo while they healed. As of June 7th, 2007, Anna was no longer a person in the court's eyes. They were now on the hunt for a master of disguise, Barbara Sklarova. She would be spotted June 15th in the company of 4 men, Czech nationals, Josef Skrla, her father, lawyer Zednik Haruzik, former police, Josef Kolinzinski, and Zlatislav Ruzicka. They were seen at the Czech embassy in Copenhagen, Denmark. Kolinzinski would go on to act as her spokesperson, saying that Barbara was scared to return to the Czech Republic in fear of punishment due to her proximity to the abuse. He said that yes, she was a 33-year-old woman pretending to be a mentally handicapped orphan. This wasn't out of malicious intent. No, she simply had age dysphoria, and this is who she really was. Her behavior certainly supported this, as she acted like a child, clutching her teddy bear and hiding behind the adults. She wished to let everyone know that she was going to fully cooperate with the authorities. She shed light on the events that led to her assuming the identity of Annika. Her and Katerina worked at the daycare together. Katerina noticed that Barbara seemed to be a better fit acting as a child than actually minding them. She was incapable of even minding herself, so Katerina took it upon herself to be a mentor. Barbara couldn't stand being a victim to the tides of time, so they concocted a cockamamie tale of Annika the orphan, beginning of a terrible, traumatic tale for 2 boys. Barbara definitely downplayed the abuse that Ondrej went through, stating that the time that he was found in the closet was the first and only time that he was kept in there, and it wasn't for very long. She would go on to ask to be given bail for release, but was seen as a flight risk, and no one was taking a chance.
Well, no shit, she was a flight fucking risk.
Denied. She master of disguise. Go on to find all about Barbara and Katerina, much of which I have stated previously. She vanished twice, claimed to be a victim, downplayed ritual abuse, assumed multiple identities. She's a real piece of work, and yet so many people come out of the woodwork to defend her. The name of her father, Josef Skrla, being connected to damn near everyone. Now, he's an interesting character. You've heard me mention his splinter sect multiple times, and since I'm conveying this to you from an occult perspective, let's talk about that for a hot minute. Josef Skrla was injured by a fall down a flight of stairs in his youth, meaning that he received disability payments for most of his life. This wasn't enough to satisfy the ego of such a wonderful man. He would make backroom deals of such shady caliber that they might as well have been an eclipse. He was a con man, folks, tricking bystanders into investing in schemes that saw little to no return. But as any snake oil salesman will tell you, you have to steal money to make money. He climbed his way to the top so far as that rumor has it the governor of Azerbaijan was a client of his military surplus sales. A real smooth talker. And even this was a display of his disloyalty to anyone but himself. The main connection that many of the key players in this terrible tale are connected through Skrla's Grail sect. It was found that Hanna Basova, one of the daycare employees and an abuse accomplice, Victor Scala, father of the girl that stood in for the DNA test for the adoption, Clara, Katerina, and Barbara herself were all members. Back in the 90s, Skrla sent out a scout troop known as Ants to recruit innocent, naive people into his cult. Over time, he cultivated it to a perversion of faith that it is. Skrla would use his power and influence to bend people to his wacky schemes. He prophesied that his daughter would be the key player in the future, and she needed bodyguards that were hardened and loyal. He needed children to mold into attack dogs for the next messiah. Right, enough about this creep. Let's dive into what the Grail movement is without the perversion of the message.
Hmm.
The Grail movement. The Grail movement. The mainstream movement is, on the surface, pretty benevolent. It's a mix of Christianity, New Age beliefs, and fairy tales. From the glance that I gave it on the internet, it was pretty clear that it was an earth-oriented and matriarchal, spiritual cult. It has also gone through many evolutions as it has had its fair share of splinter cults, one of which even mentioned enslaving the women for labor and reproduction via handmaid tale style. Overall, I would say that it seems pretty benign and is just often used as a scapegoat for psychos to justify their heinous crimes. Its core creed is the works of Oscar Earnhardt, who wrote The Light of the Truth, The Grail Message, Volume 1 in 1926 while he was in exile from Germany for being Jewish on his way to New York. There isn't much about him as far as I looked into, pretty unremarkable other than naming himself Ab-dru-shin, meaning the son of light or some shit, and starting a cult. It thrives today at 10,000 strong in several countries throughout the globe. They await the return of their Messiah like everyone else. Remember that. Though he would go on to create the doctrine, he would shy away from calling himself the leader. He died in 1941, and that was explained as him being recalled to heaven as the result of mankind's failure to such an extent that he had not expected. So much for not establishing himself as a central authority in the Grail, but every narcissist has the ego. The movement maintains Earnhardt's Vomprague estate as its spiritual epicenter where people will pilgrimage for baptism. In 91, John Dvorsky would decide that some Parzival Emmanuel was meant to be reincarnated, and that was none other than him. He wrote some other nonsense inflating his ego and went on to reject the mainstream movement, creating his own sect. This established a compound in northern Italy at the behest of their oracle, Mr. Baidan or Joseph Kleins.
So many twists and turns, bro.
So that's just everyone's like, no, I'm the Messiah. No, I'm the Messiah. No, I'm the Messiah. It's
Ain't
fucking
no
power
one
grab.
the motherfucking Messiah.
I will usurp the throne. The compound in Italy would be the source of the future heavenly kingdom. Shit got real fast. 10 members that followed this loon would starve themselves to death in nearby mountains. Purity tests were given, mediums cast out with those bad auras, prophecy of catastrophe were assisting people with their heavy wallets, run-of-the-mill cult shit. Some were smart enough to leave when this bullshit was revealed, and others were cast out. All in all, about 60 people came to this holy city where they sat upon the throne of fraud. In 1995, he and his wife were charged with parental neglect for not sending their kids to school. They all went into hiding and were never heard from again. This obviously tarnished the Grail movement, who were quick to disentangle themselves from any involvement in that insanity.
I couldn't imagine why.
They're like, we did not condone that. We are like peace, love, and fucking rock
I'm
and
fucking
roll.
out of here.
No, thank you. The Splinter sect was marked as dangerous and kept an eye on, but it wouldn't be long before some other crazy popped up with the same old song and dance. This time attracting the young Josef Skrla, who we now know would go on to do the same damn thing.
Haley, this is annoying.
What?
How is no one catching them yet?
Because they just operate as like,
Uh,
you can't touch their religion. Like this is just, oh well, they, starve themselves to death. It's not murder. It's not brainwashing. They just believed. They believed. Having such a well-connected network can be a blessing and a curse. Sure, complete strangers may help you hide in a pinch, but they're also a witness. When Jan Turek was investigated, an ex-fiancée alleged that he was violent and abusive, leading to her departure. She would later recant that testimony, saying that he was docile and devoted. But an old friend called her out and also testified that she confided in her that she was approached by a mysterious person who encouraged her to tell a different story. I don't know what's really going on here, but it all adds up to something, I'm sure. Authorities would decide to Authorities would decide to pursue these connections, getting warrants to search any parties involved. They soon discovered lists of ill children, leukemia being the most common among other cancers. The names were all of real children, but the medical documents were forged. Upon further inspection, it was noted that though the files seemed to display a certain familiarity with medical terms, they were mostly bullshit. Like, they sound good to the layman, but the doctor man knows what's up. With this discovery, the involvement of the splinter sect was even more evident, as it was determined that these documents were likely to aid in the story of sickly Annika. Now back to Jakub and Ondrej. Investigators need to know if there was anyone else involved in the abuse. The boys would claim that there was also Jerome Cactor and Hannah Basova, the daycare employee, also known as Nancy. The detective showed pictures of other Splinter Sect members, and the boys identified two of them as well, Jan Skurla, who was Barbara's brother, and Jan Turek, who would be arrested immediately for the grievous bodily harm on September 8, 2008, for the summer 2006 cottage abuse of Jakub and Ondrej. The others would remain free for several months before being apprehended, and of course, Miss Many Faces Barbara was on the lam for several months. She would go on to be missing again before the trial could move forward. As soon as she was found as Adam in Denmark, and after the lengthy stay, she was finally extradited to the Czech Republic.
See, this is why she was a flight risk.
Exactly.
This is why she was a flight risk.
Don't let her go anywhere. She will disappear. While investigating, police would speculate as to why all of the abuse had suddenly happened. What drove a good mother to torture her children? After all, plenty of mothers are overwhelmed and they don't commit these heinous acts. Was it for profit? After moving to Kurim, it is said that Katerina, Clara, and Annika lived lavishly, going on shopping sprees and eating out often. Seeing as they both made a modest salary, how could they afford 2 houses and all that neat stuff? Were they selling it for fucks on the dark webs? When Ondrej was rescued and the forensic team had to take pictures, it was noted that he smiled for the camera as if it wasn't his first time being filmed while being abused. Was it for the dark and twisted cult rituals of the Grail movement splinter sect? The abuse at the cottage sure seemed to lean in favor of that awful theory, especially given the fact that the catalyst to this fall was the insertion of Barbara Sklarova, cult princess, coupled with the fact that the leader was so tight-lipped on his daughter's involvement and her easy disappearance twice, was she meant to be the Messiah and Jakub and Ondrej her loyal guards. All of these seem plausible, though the only proof would be the 2 young boys were horribly abused by several trusted adults for no good reason. Because there is no good reason. They're just a bunch of sick fucks taking advantage of little people who can't defend themselves.
Sure.
Ultimately, those theories would fall apart. There was no discovery of proper production or storage equipment that would equate to a large-scale operation, and even though the hands were all over the Grail, even though their hands were all over it, the Grail denied any involvement, though that theory still has some life in it. The trial. Clara would be the only one to admit her total guilt, going on to claim that she was just doing what she thought was best for her boys and her adopted daughter. I take issues with this because who the fuck thinks eating the flesh of their son is the right thing to do? She maintained that she thought Barbara really was Anna from the start and had no idea she was being bamboozled. She would go on to name everyone involved and testify that Barbara participated in the abuse of Jakub and Ondrej. With her mental health considered, along with her cooperation, she was sentenced to 5 years. Yeah.
She ate somebody.
She ate her youngest son's butt cheek. 5 years. Barbara and Jan Skurla would be represented by Richard Novak during the trial. Bail request was denied as she was seen as a flight risk for having disappeared twice. Following the arrest, she was deemed to be in poor mental state, so she could not stand trial right away. She was placed in a special crisis cell separate from attacks from other prisoners and to avoid seizures and disorientation. She was a child abuser, so I'm sure the other inmates were looking to tear her apart. Once she stabilized, she was interviewed and acted like a normal adult, politely cooperating at first. Her attitude would soon change and become that of a petulant brat and unruly. With Clara's testimony, Barbara would be charged with child abuse on February 11, 2008. Barbara would undergo many evaluations, sometimes contradicting each other. It was finally settled that she was insane but competent. She knew that she knew what she was doing was wrong the entire time. Of course, she has her own stories of being abused and forced into this by her father and the movement, which I don't doubt, but bitch, you knew better. She tried to state that she was also abused by Clara and Katerina, but the scars upon closer investigation revealed to be that from her breast reduction and liposuction. Her testimony would go back and forth from a willing participant in the formation of Anna to being coerced by Katerina. She's a liar and a cheater. She claims she was sexually abused by the cult, but in fact had an intact hymen. Go figure. She was an ugly little gremlin, regardless of what gender she was bending. So, ew. She claimed she was constantly drugged and brainwashed into all of this. Nothing was her fault. She was a victim too. But everything uncovered led to the contrary. But still, this bitch would go on and on about how she was locked up, beaten, raped, but was she cannibalized by her own mother? No, she was getting finger blasted by his mother instead, on the advice of his aunt, who was the doctor the whole time. Did you hear that?
Yep, I did.
The doctor that she was texting
Yep.
was her sister. This whole thing is fucked. Vanishing Act was explained by Parner, stating that he had known Barbara for a decade and that when he was called upon, he took in Barbara. She insisted from the get-go on being called Adam the entire time. It was the same old song and dance. In the Czech Republic, judges are assigned based on a lottery by availability. So the first judge chosen had to recuse himself because he had a connection with someone involved in the case. So it was given to Pavel Goth. The accused were formally indicted on April 21st of 2008. Clara and Katerina Morova, Hanna Basova, Jan Skurla, Barbara Sklarova, and Jan Turek, charged for deprivation of liberty and abuse to minors and abuse of a person entrusted in their care. They faced up to 12 years in federal prison, except Barbara and Turek, who faced 8 for aggravated cruelty. Kat and Barb were also indicted for malicious damage to the reputation of Brno's child institution, as Anna's deception had tarnished their name. This was dismissed as there was no intent to tarnish their name, and they would just have to bear the brunt as any other party involved must. They also had their share of the blame, as they should have examined Barbara from the start, and they didn't. Motions were made and approved to keep details out of the public to save the boys from being tortured all over again. Other petty court shit went on, like one psychiatrist being accused of bias because she had donated to the child institution long after assessing the boys at the hospital. Clara would be the first to be presented in court. She was a shell of her former self, riddled with cracks and fissures. She went on to recount how Katerina had once asked her in 2003 how she felt about fostering kids. Clara would give mild interest but never made moves toward it. That is until Anna, at her sister's insistence. Given her sad tale of Norwegian orphan being abandoned with their grandmother until her death in 2004, and now she had nowhere to go, and since Clara was such a wonderful mother, with a heart so large she could surely fit one more, she obliged. She was prone to depression and people-pleasing and really looked up to her older sister. Through isolation and sleep deprivation, she let herself be led by this secret cult to harm her children. She knows she was wrong, but she stands by her intentions, to be that of a good mother just wanting to raise respectful sons. She was overwhelmed and chose the wrong guiding hand. The judge took into consideration her history of mental health, and she got 5 years, like I said earlier. Turek would testify he was incapable of harming another creature, but as we mentioned earlier, his ex said and unsaid otherwise. He was given 7 years. Hanna Basova was given 8. Barbara, with a diagnosis of histrionic personality disorder, was given 8 years, served 5 because of mental health. Jan Skurla was given 8, and Katerina, the puppet master of it all, was given 10. I don't really give a shit about her statement. All of the people involved were insane and vile and didn't get nearly enough time for what they did. All for what? Malevolent faith? For twisted profit? For heinous fun?
On today's Sip of Satisfaction, we have the incredible story of how one man secretly paid Rosa Parks rent. We now have another reason to revere Michael Illich following the news of his death on February 10th. Illich was a founder of pizza joint Little Caesars and now owner of the Detroit Lion. Detroit Tigers, which is not the Lions. But he also had an impact on one of the most notable icons of the civil rights movement. What's his name again? Illich quietly paid Rosa Parks housing in downtown Detroit for more than a decade until she passed away in 2005. According to
WYXZ Detroit.
WYXZ Detroit, Parks was living in Detroit when in 1994 someone robbed and assaulted her in her home. Pigs.
I know, right? Fuck.
What the fuck, bro?
The audacity.
She then moved to a safer apartment complex. When Illich heard about the story, he offered to pay for her housing. News of his kind action originally came to light back in 2014 when Detroit Judge Damon Keith came forth with the story for Sports Business Daily. It's important that people know what Mr. Mike Illich did for Mrs. Rosa Parks because it's symbolic of what he has always done for people of our city, he told the journalist. The story has resurfaced after his death Not only did Illich fill Americans with his delicious pizza, what an interesting phrasing, but okay article.
Pizza, pizza.
But now he will live on to fill the hearts of the people everywhere with his inspiring act of generosity. So,
And cholesterol.
Mr. Mike Illich, even though your pizza is pretty mid at
it's better
best,
than it used to be.
But you did a cool thing there, paying for Mrs. Rosa Parks' housing. She did incredible things.
Shout out Rosa Parks.
Shout out Rosa Parks. But that brings us to the end of our podcast. You can find us anywhere on social media at
Don't You Know Pod.
Or you can contact us email-wise at
don'tyouknowpod@outlook.com.
You can always visit our website,
don'tyouknowpod.com.
And that will give you directory to everything else. Go visit. Haley uploaded everything, and let's roll nice and party.
It's not too bad. Please leave a like and review.
It always helps. And don't forget to lock